This episode of Around the Layout is powered by Rapido Trains.
Buying Rapido trains will make you happy.
Rapido's going back to the 90s for the return of the Mac. 70 Macs in both HO and N scale in variations you've never seen before. Whether it's coal or racks, you need a Rapido 70 Mac. Check out all of the details at rapidotrains.com. When it's time to buy your Rapido trains, there's no place better than Spring Creek Model Trains. Right now, ATLP listeners can take 5% off in-stock, regularly priced Rapido Trains products on their website through May 31st. Use code ATLPSPRING26 at checkout at springcreekmodeltrains.com. When I was trusted with the work of North America's top modelers, I entrusted Model Train Box. Flying halfway around the world to Australia, I needed absolute confidence that those models would arrive safe, and they did. Model Train Box proved that it's secure, durable, and built for modelers who care about every detail. Learn more or order yours today at modeltrainbox.com and transport your models with confidence. ATLP Extra is our monthly newsletter delivered right to your inbox each month. Sign up for free at atlpextra.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. It's time once again for Talking Ops with Don Irace, and joining me, of course, is Don Irace. Don, good to see you.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another month of operations.
Great to have you back here, and I'm seeing you virtually for the second time in over a week. As we're recording this, I have returned from Australia, and while I was there, I walk in the shed of Aaron Stinson's Illawarra line, and I hear a familiar voice. And I'm like, nah, that all these accents down here, that one stands out very uniquely. And I walk over, and who do I see but Don on the screen, and Heath Hurwitz and Tyler Meiklejohn and Brendan Horton, all operating remotely, but to see you and Heath operating from the United States and enjoying that operating session was surely a treat.
That was in the works for a while, but they told me to keep it quiet because they didn't want you guys to find out that was happening. Then I invited John Farrington over too, so he was having some fun. So yeah, that worked out good. I tell you, that was talking about using the internet. It's on that layout is unbelievable what he's doing with that thing. That's crazy.
Yeah, from 10,000 miles away, you're over in Florida running trains on a layout in New South Wales, Australia. It's wild, the technology and the connections that we make.
I know, and it was like there's nothing there. It's just like if we were doing it right from here. You know what I mean? There was no delay, no nothing. You hit the throttle and the thing starts moving, and you're watching on the cameras, nothing locked up. It's unbelievable what we do with this internet and this model and this hobby. It's crazy.
Yeah. I'll look forward to having Aaron on the podcast. We'll talk more about all that remote operations. And, of course, with this show here, we love operating and learning about new places we can operate. And the guest we have on tonight into operations as well. And looking forward to that. It's been a long time coming. We've been talking about bringing him back since we interviewed him back on August 7th, 2025. Welcome, Alan Schroeder. Alan, good to see you.
Hello, guys. I appreciate the opportunity.
Welcome, Alan. Glad to have you on.
We're going to talk about your Marias Pass. Again, you were on episode 173, and we will include the links back to that episode on our show notes aroundthelayout.com/230. But for those who have missed that or don't quite remember back to August 7th, 2025, Alan, why don't you just give us a little bit of an overview of your layout? Tell us about it.
Sure. My layout is about 1,000 square feet. It's a mushroom design layout with 3 levels on some parts of it. I run about a 700-foot main line, mostly double track, but there's some single track pinch points to give the operators some challenges. I have 3 yards, one main classification yard called Whitefish, another smaller yard, Columbia Falls, and then a a third yard in cut bank. We run 1990s era and 2000 era BNSF. So I switch back and forth every couple of years, but currently in the 1990 BN era.
A lot of them names sound familiar to me.
Yes, my friend or your friend and our friend Mark Herrick's modeling the same location. So it's a great area to model. I run two different eras. Currently, I'm 1990 BN, and that's was my original era to model. And I had the opportunity to purchase a fellow modeler's BNSF equipment a couple of years ago after he got out of the hobby. And so I had been toying with the idea of doing a split era, and that gave me the opportunity to do it at a fairly good price. So every 2 years I'll make the switch from one to the other. But I'm currently in the 1990 era, and that's the era I really like because of the green and black and the equipment that was running at the time, and just enjoy that time period.
What flips the switch between the two eras? Like what's that moment? Like you say, you know what? I've had enough of the green. Bring the new stuff on. What flips that switch?
Well, the group I'm part of, RiverRail, has an invitational in June of even numbered years, and after that invitation is when I make the transition, and then I'll run that for 2 years, and then after the next invitational, I'll switch it back. So it's that large event that we have called RiverRail.
You switch, so you take all the BN locomotives off, move all BNS stuff on, and how about all your equipment in your rolling stock? Same thing?
Well, a lot of the BN equipment can stay on. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the BNSF stuff has to come off when I go back to BN. I do pull most of the BN locomotives off because the 2000 era has ditch lights, and my BN equipment, most of it does not have ditch lights. So that was pre-ditch light era. And so, yeah, I basically have two sets of equipment from a rolling or from a locomotive standpoint. And a lot of the rolling stock can stay from the BN era to the BNSF era, but not vice versa.
During our episode, we talked about Marias Pass, and it was fun to find out that you really kind of chose it over a gift that you had received from the wife, and getting that passenger BN set that kind of like kicked it off. But let's talk about understanding the prototype itself and the information that you gathered from that. Tell us what makes the Marias Pass operationally unique.
Well, I think it's, the mountain railroading with the helper operations out of Essex that really kind of caught my attention. I was modeling prior to getting that Sound F9 from my wife. I was modeling the 1990 Burlington Northern in western Wisconsin across to the Twin Cities. So I was in that era, but with that new gift, I switched to the mountain area for the helper service. And it's a unique area. There's not a lot of industry on the line, but what is there is tied heavily to logging and to aggregates and that type of thing, obviously. And then farther east, a lot of grain. And I was always into grain hoppers and enjoyed running a lot of grain trains when I was in the Wapaka Club and running on the modular layout. So that's always had an interest as well.
So this is kind of a two-part question, seeing how you swap railroads. What kind of traffic ran over the BN and the BNSF during these timeframes you're modeling in? Is it a lot different than the two different, or is it pretty much the same?
It's very similar, I would say. There's a lot of intermodal from the Tacoma and Seattle and Portland ports going to Chicago, and vice versa. A lot of auto traffic, a lot of grain traffic heading west from the Midwest and from the plains to the ports out in the Pacific Northwest. There's a little bit of coal traffic, not a lot, but a little bit. And then a lot of lumber heading east lumber and fruit and that type of products heading east. So there's a good mix of grain, unit trains, intermodals, and just merchandise trains. And both eras really are similar in their traffic. How the trains are made up, it's maybe a little bit different. BNSF started doing more DPU stuff, and I haven't really graduated to that. I still use helpers instead of DPUs, but the traffic mix is really similar.
Talk about the research process that went into learning more about operations on the Marias Pass.
Well, a lot of internet searching. There was a website, I don't believe it's out there anymore, but the information's part of the Friends of Burlington Northern. I think it was called Car Tracks. And that gentleman had listed all the train numbers and what years they ran. And so that was a big help initially in deciding what train numbers to use for that era in that location. First-hand knowledge of visiting the area was a big help. Seeing the trains and being out there, just taking it all in, looking at the industries that are out there. And then Pentrex video across Marias Pass has got a lot of good information in it because it's from 1990. And so, the train numbers are listed and you can see the locomotives and, the car types and the intermodal containers. And, you can get a lot of information off those types of videos. And so that was
a good video.
Yeah, that's my favorite for sure.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. So tell us what's the Maria Pass was what captures the moment for you on that? Like if what you really wanted to model and get into.
Well, just the mountain scenery and the sheer number of trees and the rocks and the bridges and the tunnels and just the beauty of the area was really what got my juices flowing. I've been there a few times now, and every time I take more and more pictures just because it's more information. It's looking at bridge abutments and bridge types and different buildings. It's just so much information that a lot of that information disappears after time. So if I can capture it on camera, at least I'll have it. But the area is just so beautiful. It's I don't know how to describe it other than it's just enormous. It's an area that you have to visit to realize it's a great place to model.
A lot of trees. Because I mentioned in your last interview that you were buying the trees.
Yes.
Because to have a party, you'd have to have a party like every other day to make 4,000 trees.
It would take a long time to make them. So luckily Darcy talked me into buying them.
There you go.
You mentioned earlier about grain trains and the passion for grain trains. Would you call that your favorite part of operations on the Marias Pass?
I would say yes. I've always liked grain hoppers. I wouldn't call myself a student of, I can't look at one and say, well, that's a 4650, but I do like seeing grain cars and grain trains. I really enjoy traveling out west and seeing the different grain elevators. I mean, that's really my passion, and obviously grain cars go with them. And so my one town of Cutbank has 3 different grain elevators or will have. They're kind of mock-ups right now. And so trying to incorporate that type of industry and business on the layout was important to me.
Okay, so how did you take everything you learned about the prototype and apply it to your layout?
Well, it's a case where you have to, give and take a little bit just because of the space that you have. Obviously, I wanted to incorporate the main towns that were in that area. So Whitefish, Columbia Falls, and Cutbank were the 3 that I chose. Cutbank because of the grain elevators and being out into the plains more than the mountainous areas of Whitefish and Columbia Falls. Columbia Falls has some unique industry in the aluminum plant that was there into the 90s. It's no longer, but I still incorporated it into my operation.
Yeah.
And then, really the area has a lot of forest product business, and so incorporating that was an important part of it. I've kind of freelanced some of that in where they're located versus the real world, just to make it work for my layout and my space. And additionally, I've had to really add some fictitious industry just to make it more operational friendly, to be able to keep people busy for a 4.5 hour session. So the other side of that is just having the scenery and the vastness of that area incorporated, whether it's the tunnels, the mountains, the bridges, and I wanted to include enough of that and have them recognizable enough that somebody that's visited the area can say, oh yeah, that's Java Creek, or that's Tunnel 3.9 and Tunnel 4, etc. So trying to make it so that I've included those and people would recognize that.
With all of the research, and you talked about grain trains obviously involved that, were there any heartbreakers of things that you had to omit from your operating scheme that you wish it could have maybe worked in? It just wasn't in the cards?
I don't know if I really had any that didn't make the cut that were strong contenders. Obviously, there's things that, compressing 100 and some miles of railroad into, a 700-foot main line, you have to leave out towns, you have to leave out certain bridges and certain tunnels of the area. Really, I've had to embellish the industry, so I really didn't have to leave anything out from that standpoint. It was more the scenic elements that wouldn't make the cut. One would be like Two Medicine Bridge and East Glacier would have been really cool to include with that barn scene. I just didn't have the right space for that to be included. I haven't included like Isaac Walton Inn because that would be in the aisle instead of, along the track. So, there's a lot of things like that would have been neat to include. I just didn't have the space, or, they'd be in the aisle instead of on the layout. So I haven't included them.
Yeah, I think that, we all gotta pick and choose what we have room for, because we can't model everything. So you kind of gotta, like I said, you gotta pick and choose. I have the same thing here. I know Mark did the same thing on his layout. It's just we'd all like to have the plenty of room to model everything we could possibly model for the prototype, but unfortunately we just don't have that kind of space.
Yeah, and the Isaac Walton Inn is probably the one thing that would be something I really wish I could have included, just because of it being such a landmark and a well-known establishment, but it just wouldn't fit the spot.
So tell us how you designed your layout for operations.
Well, I've operated on a lot of layouts through the years, and so you have a good idea of what it takes to create a good operating layout. I've had 2 previous layouts that also helped in that. And so it's taking all that knowledge and experience of different layouts and different situations and trying to incorporate what I have for a space and make it work. And I've got a good friend that does a real good job of track planning, and he's given me ideas over the years on things. And so just taking some of those ideas and start drawing on paper and creating what's in the basement now.
Over the years, since you've been doing it, if you've made any major changes to change your operation up, is it still the same as it was when you started? Because a lot of people tweak stuff as they operate, say, well, this is not going to work, we're going to do this instead. How much of that have you had to do?
I've done some tweaking, more on, like, for instance, in Columbia Falls, I have Plum Creek timber. And when I initially started operating the layout, I had a yard master in Columbia Falls that would use a BN switcher and work Columbia or Plum Creek timber and all the rest of the industry in Columbia Falls. After a few sessions, I decided to have Plum Creek timber have its own switcher. And so the yard master or the switch crew that's in Columbia Falls has to use the Plum Creek timber locomotive to do the pulls and the spots. They can't go onto the BN main line. They can only go into the yard in Columbia Falls to do car swaps. And so it just added a little bit of extra to that job. Another one is my Libby logger is a local out of Whitefish that works several industries west of Whitefish. And one of the industries is mountain lumber. And initially I set it up where the local would go out, they'd come to the mountain lumber, they'd do their pulls and their spots, and then continue on. Now I've changed it up so that industry also has its own switcher. It's a little critter, a G40 or EMD 40 locomotive. And so the crew goes there first, does their pulls, does their spots, gets the block ready to get picked up. And then they report to Whitefish and do their normal local run. But when they get to this industry, all they do is drop a block and pick up the block that they pulled previously and then continue on. So it just added a little bit of fun, I would call it, using a kind of a tiny locomotive to do that initial switching. And so it's little tweaks like that I've done over the course of time, changing trains, where they originate, where they terminate, some of that type of thing. But from a physical railroad standpoint, I haven't changed a lot of the railroad. It's just the operating side of it with the locals and what goes on inside the specific industry.
Right. I mean, the nice thing about that is that you can have a place for an operator to be most of the night without them moving all over the layout. That's I try to explain that to people too. And I do the same thing, like my paper mill. I get a guy up at East, he's in the paper mill all night long, and and just in there switching everything all out. But it's always good to have those 2 or 3 industries to keep a couple operators busy all night long. I like that. Good idea.
Yeah, and I don't have super big industries, but I have enough different ones and unfortunately they're kind of concentrated in the yard areas or the town areas, other than like this mountain lumber is kind of out in the boonies west of Whitefish. So the local works that, but most of the other industry is either in one of the 3 towns.
Let's talk about putting all of that plan together. I jokingly have said, and I say jokingly, but I actually did it. When I planned mine, I sat on the stairs for hours just staring at the layout, putting together the operating scheme. Okay, this ties to this ties to that. Talk about how you put this entire plan together based on that prototypical information, based on the things you knew you had to cut, the things you wanted to keep, and then make that all interact. How did that all come together?
Yeah, there's a lot of nights where I would wake up in the middle of the night and think about it. And it was a way of getting back to sleep, really. But, it's just a matter of, trying to determine how it will all fit together, and I created a list of the trains that I wanted to include and, what industries are on the layout and how they're going to get the cars, how are the cars going to get delivered to that yard and then to those industries. I'm a Excel geek, so I used Excel a lot to create, my plan and putting it all together. And I've tweaked it. A couple times, redone waybills, just trying to make it so it works better. One of the initial challenges I had was, I'd run a train out of staging, let's say train 208 works Whitefish, works Columbia Falls, works Cut Bank, and then goes back into staging on the other end. And I might have 10 cars for Whitefish. Well, then the next time 208 ran, the cars it would get wouldn't be the same cars that it, same type of cars that it delivered. So everything was always unbalanced. It was a challenge, not for the operation, but for me between sessions, because I had to pull a lot of cars off the train in staging in order to get the right ones back into it. And so I really had to tweak, to look at my plan, try to figure out, what cars need to hit what yard, and then make sure that they're going back in that same train or that type of train when they're exiting the yard, so that when that train gets back to staging, I don't have to pull those cars off. I just flip the waybill and off we go again. And so,
Right.
It takes a lot of time and a lot of thought process into making that work right, especially, with a lot of different branch lines feeding the yards and different through trains feeding the yards. So, it's a tweak all the time, but I think it's finally coming together well enough that I don't spend a lot of time between sessions.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a while to do that. I mean, I've done it, and sometimes I'm still doing it like 3 years later, and I'm still this ain't working, this ain't working. This train's got to go out before this train goes. It's a lot, it's a lot to get a session to run smooth and work. So it saves you all the extra work at the end of the session to get everything back for the next session.
Yeah, and I've even just recently, when I first started operating this layout, I had a list of 40 trains I'd like to run, and I'd create the list and maybe have a list of 25 or maybe more on my list to try to run. And, we would never get through the whole list. Well, then when I go to set up the next session, I'd have to, cut and paste and tweak all that. And finally I was thinking, why don't I just set up 2 separate AM and a PM session, even though I don't really use a fast clock, but set it up that way so that I can limit the number of trains I run in each session, but that they would all run and get through the whole thing, so that between sessions I don't have to do a lot of changing of the lineup. And
Right.
I've done it about 6 or 7 sessions now, and it seems to be working pretty well. So I'm happy with that change.
In that, you mentioned that you're operating using car cards and waybills. Tell us your choice of doing that.
Well, my opinion is they are very self-healing. That's, my opinion. I've used switch lists, whether it's Ship It or the JMR switch lists. There's guys in our RiverRail group that have used the JMRI switch lists, and it works. It's just not my preference. I like the car cards. I think I can control what I want to control with them. It allows the yards to work at the speed that they can work or want to work, and can keep things flowing versus waiting for the switch list to come in. Is it as prototypical? Probably not. I understand, real railroads use switch lists, and, but they also have more time to make that happen. So it's a trade-off, and it's just my personal opinion. I like that they're self-healing.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're right about that. With the prototype, they have computers to do all that stuff for them.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to sit at the desk and sit there and make out switch lists all night long.
Right.
See, I was the opposite. On my big layout, I use car cards because I had so much going on. To do switch lists would have just been a nightmare. But on this layout, I started with car cards, and I'm like, this layout works good with switch lists. I only got 12 trains, and there's only like 6 switch lists I have to make because the two trains they just run the same with different cars every other week. So, so I just reuse those same switch lists over and just swap them out. But for what you're doing, for the amount of cars you got on your layout, definitely car cards are definitely your friend. That's for sure.
We could have an entire episode on the debate between car cards and waybills and what's right. And I think it's situational as well. But maybe, Alan, you'll agree with this. It seems like car cards and waybills, there's a lot of work on the front load, right? You got to create the car card. But then it's a little easier, like you mentioned, the self-healing and kind of self-staging, flip the waybill, where switch lists seem to be like a steady amount of work, right? So you got to either a steady amount of just make sure you manage the switch list, or the front loaded heavy work of the car cards and waybills, but then it gets easier as you go. That for me, at least, that's a synopsis, right?
Yeah. And I'm of the belief that the waybill doesn't have to stay with the car. I'm not afraid to pull a waybill and put a different one in if it fits the need that I have for that train and that car. It's just how I roll.
So some guys that use car cards, do you let the crews, do they swap the cards and turn them over to the next number, or do you do that yourself, or they just spot the car?
They just spot it. I do all the flipping between sessions.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Okay. Interesting. So let's get down to how do we control this layout? Who's the boss? Is there a dispatcher? Is it a remote dispatcher? Is it paper, signals, CTC, ABS? What are you doing? Explain.
So I have CTC with the dispatcher. It's JMRI with CATs for the control. Digitrax components underneath the layout for block detection and signaling and turnout control. So the dispatcher controls the flow of traffic over the layout. I have a train master that manages the staging side of the layout and gets trains in and out of staging and manages that side of it. That's usually the job I take during a session, but I've got a couple guys that'll volunteer to do it, so it frees me up to run trains or whatever during the session. I run with a crew of 15, so with the dispatcher, train master, yard master in Whitefish, and 2 switcher engines in Whitefish. So the yard master doesn't hold the throttle; they just manage the flow through the yard and manage the car cards and waybills. Columbia Falls has a yard master that is a footboard yard master, and there's also a second switcher crew there, so they oversee everything in Columbia Falls. I have 2 locals that run each session. The grain grinder is the one that works cut bank, and I have that one run every session. There's just enough traffic flow there. And that's one of those jobs where initially when I started operating, I had a crew. He was called the yard master there, and it just seemed like it was not enough for a full-time person. So I just made it a local that would come out of Haver staging to cut bank, work the job, and then finish up and then go into the road pool, which seems to work better. And then I need a helper crew to push trains up the hill. And then I've got another local. Actually, I have 2 more locals. One works the AM session and one works the PM session. And so I need 1 crew each session for those locals. And then the rest are road crews. And for my sessions, we determine seniority at the beginning of or prior to the session. When I'm given my orientation, we draw chips, poker chips with a BN logo on the back and a number on the flip side. And usually number 1 is the high seniority, gets the first pick, and that's how we divvy out jobs.
Okay. So let me ask you another question on that. How does a crew member get to the point where he's able to dispatch your layout?
Somebody's fishing for a job, by the way. I just want to make sure that's very clear here.
I just want to know how you qualify.
We know what goes on these shows. Don does talking ops because he's looking for remote dispatching opportunities. He also likes talking about ops. That's the secondary to finding dispatching jobs. But go ahead, Alan. Tell us all about it.
Well, again, it's based on seniority for that session. And if I've never done that job and I have number one pick and I want to dispatch, I will let them dispatch. However, I will have a trainer with them for the first half hour or so just to get them acquainted to the panel. And obviously, if they're a regular operator here and just new to the dispatcher, they obviously know the layout. So it's not quite as big a learning curve. Now, if it's a guest operator and they want to try it, again, I will let them with some training with a buddy sitting next to them. And usually, my panel's pretty forgiving. The layout's long enough and there's enough double track. It's not too difficult for a guy to get in the chair and get the trains over the road. It's just the little nuances that help make it go smoother that they may or may not learn the first time they're in the chair.
Yeah. See, I mean, when I dispatch other people's layout, I tend to kind of hope that they got some single track somewhere because it's nice because you can plan meets for trains. It just kind of breaks it all up where you just don't have trains running back and forth on each other all the time.
Yeah.
But I did the same thing when I had a guys let anybody want to dispatch can dispatch, but if they were new, they had a senior guy with them to just show them. Because if you don't, they'll just, especially if they never really operated on the layout and don't know the layout at all.
Right.
It's a hard job to do. It's not easy.
And I mean, I've had guests that have done wonders in the chair. It's just a matter of their experience and their knowledge of a dispatcher panel. And, there's enough layouts in our group that have used JMRI and CATs that, they're familiar with how the panel works and, when you right click or left click or whatever, how drop downs pop up or whatever. So usually it's not an issue with the regular people in our group. And if a guest wants to do it, the panel is simple enough that they can do it without gelling things up.
I got a chicken or egg question for you regarding your layout crew size. 15 is a big crew. I mean, that's a lot of folks to coordinate in a way to keep things going. When you had this all in mind, did you build a layout for that crew or did you end up building a layout and needed 15 guys? I mean, how did that all happen for you?
It was build the layout. And then, as I started developing the plan and, what we were going to do, how many people do I need to make it happen? And, 15 kind of hit the magic spot. I will take more, if my call list is full and somebody visiting wants to show up and, come on, I've had 18 guys here without a problem. I've had 21 once, and that was too much. I won't do that again.
That breaking point there.
Yeah. And the thing with how this layout is designed, my staging is double-ended. My layout is a complete loop, and staging is part of that loop. And so if I have extra operators, I can run additional unit trains or intermodal trains and keep them busy. They're not doing any work on the layout, but they're getting across the layout. Right. And so that's one of the things that makes the design work for that many operators.
I mean, that's a good thing to have through trains like that because it's good for operators to run through the layout to see where everything is. I mean, It's just like qualifying for any railroad. You got to know your route you're on,
Right.
So, I mean, that's not a bad thing. Plus, it's good for the dispatcher because it keeps him busy too.
Right, exactly. And, we try to run 25 trains a session, sometimes a little bit more, depending on the crew. it all happens because of, everything working together. Dispatcher doing a good job, the yard's doing a good job, train master getting trains in and out, and everything running good.
So how do you incorporate new operators on the layout? You mentioned those through trains. Is that part of that process?
Yeah. If I have a operator that's never been here before, a lot of times when they pick their chip, they'll, pick a road train or a road job, and I'll usually pair them with somebody for the first trip over the line, just because, the signals might be foreign to them, and, how to read my train cards and, all of that. So just giving them some confidence with another operator going with them the first time, is usually how we handle it here. And I've had newbies jump into a yard job, not yard master, but yard switcher. And, because the yard master's there overseeing them, they can work with them and work through that without a problem. Again, dispatching, I've had guys that have never been here before dispatch. And again, it's just spending a little time with somebody, and then, they're off to the races on their own. So, we encourage new operators. We want to see new operators. That only helps this hobby and it helps our operating group. And the only way they're going to want to come back is if they have fun, and so it's making sure that, we're setting them up to have fun.
So tell us, what's the preparation look like on the Marias Pass for an op session?
Well, I have, like I said, an AM and a PM lineup. I'll print that off and I'll start restaging the layout. So I'll flip waybills on the cars at Industries, add loads, remove loads, pull trains out of staging, because my staging is underneath the layout, and it's not hidden per se, but it's underneath the layout. So I pull those trains out, rework them based on my train makeup cards. And those include information like cart type, if they have to be a BN car or similar, or if they can be any road, what industry they're going to, and what block I want them in on the train. So I usually have three blocks, one for the first town it gets to, one for the second, one for the third, etc. I will print out my lineup. I will modify the lineup if I have any dog catch trains that were left from the previous session, which I do like to have, because when I start a session, I want to have enough trains out there so nobody's sitting in the crew lounge at the start of a session. So that, usually means I need to have five trains ready to go. And then as we get closer to the session, I print the call board off the RiverRail website, and then create my jobs list, print that out, and then my pre-session SOP. So I have a checklist that I go through every session, whether it's for rewriting instructions for the yards, whether it's just doing that morning type of things, like turning the layout on and starting the computers up and starting cameras up, and etc. So there's a checklist of things that I do, whether it's a week out or the morning of. And so all that paperwork and everything is compiled, and then the morning of the session we fire up and we're ready to go.
That's good. Now you run signals, correct? So
Yes.
you got all your signals and everything?
Yes.
So I had this happen to me last night, so that's why I'm going to put it out there. When you do your briefings, do you consider asking operators about colorblindness at all for signals?
I have not. There is one gentleman in our group that is colorblind, and he's got a little, I don't know what it's like a 3D mask, but it's a single pane that he holds up and he can kind of tell the color. I've never had anybody other than him say that they can't tell what color the signal is, and if it were a problem, then, obviously I would have to try to figure out what to do with it. Yeah.
Well, so again, I asked the question because last night I got a new guy. It's like his third time here, and it's his third time. And all of a sudden, last night he was doing a run up to the Valley Falls, and the dispatcher gives him the clearance at the end of the yard clearance, and he's got a signal right there. And I'm over there with him trying to help him out. And he's like, he says, what do I weigh? I said, well, if anything better than all red, you could just go. It's yellow, green. He goes, well, are they both red? And I knew right away. You know what I mean? Because he couldn't tell. He could tell if it was green, but he couldn't tell if it was yellow. So he has trouble with yellows and reds, But I was just, and it's not the first time. And I don't like that. I really don't like to ask people, but it's when you're operating on a railroad like that with signals, that's something you really need to know. You know what I mean? So you kind of help the guy or keep somebody with him to kind of give him, what the signal aspect is, so he doesn't be blowing through red signals and getting in trouble. You know what I mean? So
yeah, that would be important on a CTC or a signaled layout.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that can be talked about in a pre-ops. And you mentioned about poker chips and establishing seniority. If we were sitting in a pre-ops meeting right now, what are some of the other elements that you'd be going through?
Well, I like to welcome everybody to Irace Pass and indicate what date it is. And I've gotten to the point where it's always September of 1990 on Irace Pass. We go through some safety things like, egress windows and up the steps and where restrooms are. Even though my regular crews have been here multiple times, I still tell them where the restrooms are, how to get out. Talk about some of the jobs and if any changes have occurred on those jobs. Talk about what else has changed from previous sessions. Talk about F6 is my braking function. So making sure that operators know that if they are trying to move their locomotive and they hear it revving up, but it's not moving, hit F6 and it'll release the brake.
That's not the most important reason to know what F6 is. F6 is good to know. Why is this thing won't stop? You need to know F6.
That happens all the time. I was like, the thing ain't moving. It's revving up. Ain't going. Did you put the brake on? Yeah. Well, you got to unbrake it because it's like I said. Picture yourself sitting in your car with your foot hot on the brake and slamming on a gas pedal. What do you think is going to happen?
Right.
Yeah, but again, that's not the best reason to know what F6 is. It's when you get the train moving and you can't stop it. That's when you need to know what F6 is.
And I tell them that too. If you need to stop fast, hit F6. So, and the cool feature about that is, you can feather your stop, by hitting it and continuing to hit it, which releases and sets and releases and sets. So it's kind of fun to play with that. But it's like car guards and waybills versus switchless. There's guys that love it and there's guys that hate it.
Yeah. And you get a lot of momentum in the locomotives and it takes forever for the engine to stop.
Yeah, and I've tried to limit that. I want it to be fun, like you said. And having a train get away from you because you don't know how to stop it isn't my idea of fun. So there's a momentum, but it's not crazy momentum. So it's still a kind of a fun function, though, in my opinion.
Right. Do you use proto throttles? Anybody using proto throttles on your layout?
No. The TCS WOW throttles, the Wi-Fi throttles is most modern thing we've got. Otherwise, everything here is Digitrax, UR or UT4s. UT4
the proto throttle is good for the proto throttle is good for braking because you can really you can really brake. You know what I mean? It's so much because I use it and that's like my favorite function, the braking function. Because I got my momentum up to 255. So you really gotta apply it. You gotta brake. You know what I mean? You pull some tonnage and you get pushed along. You gotta start braking early. Don't wait till the last minute.
Yep.
So the other thing I wanted to touch on, and we jumped off. What do you use for communications? That's just the only other thing I want to get in there about your op sessions.
I've got phones throughout. And so initially when a crew gets on a train, the train master gives a crew slip to the dispatcher so they'll know what train and who the crew is and where they're at. And, and then I also include if there's any work online, if they have to stop at Whitefish or Columbia Falls, I mark that on that crew slip. So then, the dispatcher knows that they're at point A, they're ready to go. So then he can start giving them signals. So the crew really doesn't have to communicate with the dispatcher. It's more for the yards. And then I also have radios for the helper crew and the dispatcher to just allow them to, expedite the helpers back down the hill and make it easier for, lining up behind a train that's ready to get pushed up the hill.
Earlier, you mentioned that you leave some of the outlawed trains on the layout and you kind of pick up where you left off the last time. With that way, it keeps folks going and they're not hanging around the crew around so long. I would imagine that helps provide some variety and some uniqueness in between operating sessions. Are there any other ways that you're providing uniqueness on each operating session, or ways that you shake it up? I mean, other than take all the green stuff off and put the orange stuff on, right?
Right.
Like we talked about earlier, and switching the railroad a bit. How do you kind of keep those operating sessions unique?
Well, the lineups are different every session. One, because of those dog catch trains being out there, so the first part of the session is always whatever's left from the previous session. And the lineup is different. So I don't run all the branch line trains every session. So the AM session, I might run a UP train from Kalispell, or the Striker branch, Eureka branch, I should say, down to Whitefish. And the next session, the opposite would run from Whitefish to Eureka. And so every session, they're not running. They run one way or the other. Same with Kalispell branch. My through trains are different numbers. I use different manifests for one session versus the other, just to create some variety. And it probably doesn't make a difference to the operators, but it makes a difference to me. And that's why I do it, because I know that it's a different train than the last time.
And that's important too. I mean, it is your railroad,
right?
And you want to, have interest back in your own operations. And, another thing it seems that you do is that you operate the layout too, correct?
Right. I last session I was part of the road crew, so I was running trains with the rest of the guys. Generally, I try to do the chainmaster job, just to, it's kind of a non-glorious and operating job, but it's an important part of the operation. So I tend to gravitate to that job just because I think it's one that most people wouldn't choose if they had a choice. But I've got a couple guys that will do it, and and then I'll take a different job. I've yard mastered my Whitefish yard once because nobody wanted it. When you get through the list of 15 guys and nobody wants to take that job, in the next session, that's the first job to go. So it's weird how that works.
No rhyme or reason.
Yeah.
How about like MOW? Do you do anything extra like MOW equipment, special trains? Do you put track out of service because you got so much trouble track main line? Do you put a work crew out on the main line somewhere so the dispatcher has to fish trains around this thing?
I started incorporating a work train. Actually, this last session was the first time I've done that. So I had them dropping ballast on the double track between Java and the Summit. Just to try to mess up the dispatcher a little bit, slow things down a little bit. Next session is going to be a tie gang doing the same thing in the same area. I have an officer special that runs just about every session. So it's, a high priority train to get across the layout in front of everything else. So some of those things. I do have a snowplow extra that could run. I haven't done it. I think I did one session with that just because. So I know our friend John Parker runs it when it snows there. They run it.
I was going to say that. Yeah,
I might have to incorporate something like that. But usually, no. It's the standard lineup, and and then I've started incorporating some things to slow it down. I do have a Sperry car that runs just about every session, and that really slows things down because that runs about 10 miles an hour. And if the operators is playful, they'll call dispatcher and say this track's out of service for a half hour or whatever. So the guys that like to have fun will do that during a session.
I mean, I know as a dispatcher, I love that challenge. You know what I mean? To have track out of service, and it's up to you to get these trains around each other and keep the flow moving. You know,
Right.
so it's
Right.
rather just sitting there and you go, well, I got 2 tracks to play with. I just keep running trains back and forth, setting signals up, but as there's no challenge to,
Right.
you know, there somewhere, you know, I just like to be challenged, I guess.
Well, and it's real life, so you know, real railroads have problems out on the line, so you know they have to work around it.
So you mentioned earlier a crew of 15 to run your Marias Pass layout. And I know it's important not only to be able to fill those crews and keep the railroad going, but keep that momentum going as well. And you mentioned RiverRail. Talk about that group and how that's helped you keep that momentum going and keep the Marias Pass running.
Yeah, RiverRail is an operating group that I've been a part of for many years out of La Crosse, Wisconsin. And the key to this group is the website. It really helps the group stay involved, stay active, allows the layout owners to post sessions, whether it's a work session or an operating session. You can, you know, I could post today for next year if I wanted to and set up, you know, several sessions. I can wait to open the sessions or I can open them today. You know, so there's a lot of flexibility within that website. And our webmaster, Shane Lambert, has created a really nice tool for our group. And I think he's shared it with some other groups now outside of RiverRail, just because it's a good tool for an operating group to have. I appreciate it because I can set my schedule, get those sessions posted, and know I'm going to have a crew for, you know, XYZ date. No, you know, and the revised website that came out here a few months ago allows for a wait list even. And so if my 15 people are signed up and one of them cancels out and somebody's on the wait list, they automatically pop up into the operating crew, which is really nice. I think without that website, we would have a tougher time getting crews and keeping people engaged. You know, there's probably 40 regular operators in our group. There's 15 layouts. Most layouts take about 10 to 15 operators. One takes 21 or 22. One takes 2. You know, so it's a mix of layout sizes, different eras, different locales, but we all have fun. And you know, we're serious about operating, but not to the point of being obnoxious. And we have fun when we're doing it, you know, and that's the name of the game for this group and for this railroad here. I want people to have fun.
Yeah, well, that's what anybody's layout. You want people to come back. The worst thing you can do is start razzing people if they, you know, or tell them how to do things. I don't tell my guys how to do anything. Here's your job. Here's your switch list. You go out and you do it whatever way as long as the cars end up where they're supposed to end up so the customers don't call me at the end of the day, I'm good with no matter what you do, because every train crew switches their train differently, you know. But it's good to get you guys on here because we're trying to reach out to the layout owners that are lone wolves. They're interested in operations. They don't know how to go about it. So this information that you gave us tonight, along with all our other guests, help these guys to get over that hump, to reach out to other people. You know, what's your railroad going to do? You built this railroad. What is it going to do? And, you know, and all this information helps these people. We appreciate you being here.
And this website is a great tool to do that. And it's great that your group has organized it in a way where it's shareable. We'll share the links to RiverRail on our website, aroundthelayout.com/230. So I think there's only one question left, and that is actually for Don. Don, when are we going to Wisconsin?
I was going to go this year, but unfortunately I can't. I was going to go. I'm like, then it was in June, and then my father called me, goes, oh, Corey's graduating from the Union Electrical School in June. I'm like, June. Or is it April? So I had to wait for my nephew to let me know, is it in April? Please be in April, or is it in June? He called me, it was in June. So the next The next
all this
years?
life getting in the
Every
way of
2
our
years,
model
right?
railroading.
Well, 2 years.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I ain't going to make it this year. I'm sorry. I'd love to come out and see the layouts out there, but I'll definitely be out there the year after, no doubt.
Excellent stuff. And Alan, so glad that we were able to get you back here on the podcast and talk ops with you. You've got an awesome layout. Mark has raved about the operations on it, and Don and I can't wait to get out there and experience it ourselves. Until then, thank you so much for being a part of our Talking Ops episode, and look forward to catching you down the line.
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. I really enjoyed our visit and definitely look forward to having you visit to Wisconsin.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.